Up next, Gordon and I take a look at the Fujifilm Instax SQ10 on the Camera Labs Photography Podcast. Hi, this is Doug Kay. I'm here with Mr. Camera Labs, Gordon Lang. We're going to do something a little unusual today. We're going to look at an instant film camera, the Fujifilm Instax SQ10. Good morning, Gordon. Good afternoon. You've got one in your hand right there, don't you?
I certainly do. This is the first one that I've formally reviewed. I've played with Polaroids back in the day. I've also used the other Fujifilm Instax products, but I've never actually done a proper review of them. But they're enormously popular cameras, and this is a brand new, quite an interesting development in the series. So I thought, you know what, it's about time we review it on Camera Labs. So that's what we're going to do in the show today.
Okay, and let's just take a brief moment to thank all of our listeners and viewers. Remember, you can find us on YouTube. You can listen to the audio, leave us comments, and see that little book over Gordon's shoulder? That's Gordon's book, which we both love. Of course, Gordon has to love it. It's his book, but I love it too. Get a copy of In Camera. It's marvelous. We'll talk about that sometime later. Gordon, let's just dive right in. Let's keep it short and sweet. Tell us about this camera.
Okay, so this is the SQ10 now. Fujifilm has been making cameras which have got instant printers in them for quite a long time. In fact, I think Instax first started in 1998. So at the time we recorded this video, it's about almost 20 years old, this concept. And up until now, Fujifilm had two main formats. There was the mini format and the wide format. Now, the wide format kind of comes out on its side, but they have the same. The print size is the same on one dimension. It's just depending on how big it is on the other. The mini size was kind of, if you imagine a business card type size print with an image in the middle. And the wide size is more like a 6x4 inch postcard size print. But again, you know, with a fairly substantial white border around it. Now, those were analog cameras. In fact, I have one here. This is an Instax Mini 70. Look at its lovely bright color. And if I open up the back of this camera, oh no, there's a film in it. There isn't really. I'm just joking with you, because the language would be blue at this point because they're not cheap, the cartridges. But you can see, if you're watching us on YouTube, if you're not, I'll describe it. You can actually see the lens in the back there. So the lens, the light comes through the lens and it exposes a film cartridge actually in the camera, and then the picture comes out the top. It's a process that's familiar to anyone who's seen a Polaroid camera. The pictures are smaller, but the principle's the same. The print comes out straight away. The picture kind of slowly appears. I'm going to show you one actually appearing later on in this video. And if that's not worth hanging around for, I honestly don't know what is. But as you can see, it's a fully analog process. And the images that the two existing Instax formats produce are both kind of wide. They're a wide shape. So, Doug, do you have one in your hands as well? We're going to refer back to it, but just at the moment, do you have one that you can show us as well?
Yeah, I have one that I use quite a bit. This is the Instax Mini 90 that I've had for a number of years, and it's very similar to what you have. It takes the same size film.
That's right. And you buy them in cartridges that typically have 10 exposures in them. Now, the Instax SQ10, which I'm holding now, is pretty unique in this lineup for two reasons. The first reason is that it outputs square images, very fashionable in the Instagram world. One-to-one shape square images are really nice. I do really like composing in that format, and there's something very classy about it. You know, it's been used obviously by medium format and large format photographers for years. I'm very fond of it. So that's the first thing that's new. It's a square format. But the other thing that's new is the way that it actually captures and generates those images. As you saw on the previous Instax Mini, it was a fully analog process. Light came in the lens and exposed the film directly. Now, the Instax SQ10 is the first one to actually employ a digital sensor. There is a 1/4 inch CMOS sensor inside this camera. So the light comes in through the lens and exposes the sensor, as it would in a normal digital camera. That is then saved to either internal memory or to a micro SD card. And then if you want, well, then one of the most important differences is it's got a screen on the back. So you can use the screen for composition and, more importantly, for playback. Now, when you can set this camera up to just output a picture every single time, which is how the old ones worked, or you can set it up to only output a picture when you tell it to. And this is the first key advantage, because when you're looking at, best part of $1 per print or something along those lines, then, you don't want to make mistakes with these. You want to make sure that you're happy with the picture. So the real key benefit of the SQ10 is first of all, being able to record those images and use them later on in whatever way you want, and or print them out as you want them. If you look at a picture and think, well, that's a nice picture, but I don't want to print it, you don't have to waste a print. If you look at a picture and think, that's a terrible picture, I definitely don't want to print it, you don't need to. If you look at it and you think, I think I'm going to print that picture, but I'll wait until later, you can do that as well. So it's up to you when you want to do the printing, and that in turn can save you a bit of money. So Doug, as an existing user, because you obviously have an Instax camera, what do you think of this kind of change to go from the idea of something that really is, every time you press that shutter release, a print is going to come out and it's going to cost you money, and that's the last time you'll see that composition. In a way, it's kind of appealing that ephemeral process. It's gone at that point. It's out there in the wild. But equally, it can be expensive. So what do you think about this approach?
Yeah, it's a mixed blessing. I mean, there is something about the fact that with the analog camera, you get the picture. That's it. Its only existence is in that print. It's never going to be any. There's never going to be any other version of it. So, using my Mini, I have often wanted to be able to retain a digital copy or make multiple copies. So, I would look forward to that. I should point out. Let's talk about the price for a second. Should we do that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
So this camera in the U.S. retails for about $280. The Mini 90 that I have here is less than half the price, $130. The Mini 8 and the Mini 9 are in the $60 range, $60 and $65. So there's a big difference. There's also a big difference in the cost of the film, which is surprising. The Mini film, if you buy it, depending on the quantity you buy it in, you can get this down to 56 cents per shot. The square film for the SQ10 is, well, in a pack of 10 exposures, is $1.70 per shot, $17 for 10 exposures. So it's quite a bit more expensive, which may over time change quite a bit. I wonder to what extent the square format was influenced by Instagram and their original square format concept, and whether it's a sort of an Instagram camera to some extent.
Yeah, it isn't. I mean, it's an Instagram camera in the idea of capturing spontaneous square images, but not in terms of how you then subsequently share them, because this camera, the SQ10, does not have Wi-Fi. It's not a particularly straightforward process to get the images off it digitally and onto another device for sharing. And it is worth pointing out at this point in the video that this is not, you should not think of this as a digital camera with a built-in printer. It is an instant camera that is designed for printing pretty much alone, that just so happens to use digital technology and just so happens to let you save those images and use them again and do some other things with them. But don't think of it as a digital camera with a built-in printer, because it does not have that degree of flexibility and or connectivity. I mean, I think at this point it's also worth mentioning a couple of rivals. It's not the only game in town. Obviously, there's the 3 formats now from Fujifilm. They print out. I'm just going to show you.
But wait a minute. Back up a second.
What?
I honestly don't understand the difference between a camera that prints that also has digital and a digital camera that also prints. What's the difference?
Well, if it was a digital camera that also had a printer in it, then I would expect it to have, first of all, high resolution images. I'll say right now, I'll spoil the surprise, it's a 3 megapixel camera. So if it was a digital camera, you'd want it to be 16 or 20 or 24 megapixels. So the pictures, yes, you can access them. You're not going to do that much with a 3 megapixel picture. Also, I would expect in a modern camera for it to have wireless connectivity. I would want it to be easy to get those pictures onto my phone or onto my computer for sharing. There are ways of doing it, but it's not that simple. Also, as you'll find out, I mean, I'm just spoiling all the surprises.
I'm sorry.
It doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you anything about. There's no exposure control, but it doesn't even tell you what exposure it's using or give you any feedback at all, really. Battery life even, or shots remaining. So it's not designed like a normal digital camera. It just so happens to use digital technology, but it is an instant camera. That's its thing. It just uses a sensor rather than a direct analog process.
Okay, we'll get into this. We'll get into the rest of the subtleties down the road. I'll let you go back to your own train of thought there if you haven't forgotten it already.
Of course not. I'm a professional, Doug. A professional what is the question? No, nothing rude in the comments, please. So here's a print that I made with the camera earlier. I took this last week when it was sunny, but I printed it out today because that is one of the unique benefits of the SQ10. You can do it after the event. This is Brighton Seafront.
It's crooked.
Yeah, not now.
Okay, good. So yeah, it's a diagonal camera.
Yeah.
If you're listening to the audio podcast, this makes no sense whatsoever.
It makes no sense. And if you're watching it, it makes even less sense. The reason that I shoot some of my pictures diagonally like this is for test reasons. It's so that there is detail in the corners that I can test the corner performance of the lens. If you ever see test shots on Camera Labs which are going diagonally across the frame, that's why we do it. And in fact, I might as well just say right now that the lens is pretty sharp into the corners, so it passes the first test. Now, if you looked at this print, I'm holding it away from my head. It's bigger than my head at the moment. Now it's smaller than my head. You've no idea how big this active image area is. It looks a bit like an old Polaroid print. It does because it's square. It has a similar kind of shape and proportion, but it is smaller. So the SQ format outputs images which are 2.4 inches by 2.4 inches, which is in metric 62 by 62 millimeter. The 62 is the constant factor. The 2.4 inch 62 mm is the constant factor in the Instax format. The Instax Mini is 2.4 by 1.8 inch, 62 by 48 mm. Tiny little pictures, but they are quite cute. And of course, they will, if for some reason you do have a business card Rolodex type kind of book, you can insert them in with that degree of convenience. The Instax Wide, of course, also shares that 62 mm dimension, but it's wider. It's by 99 mm or 3.9 inches, almost 4 inches. So there are those three formats. All of them are smaller than the classic Polaroid format. You don't happen to have a Polaroid print near you, do you, Doug?
A print, no, but I've got a box of film. Does that count?
Yeah, I mean, as I recall, I think they were about just over 3 by 3 inches.
Yeah, they're larger for sure.
Approximately 80 by 80 millimeter, approximately. So they're bigger. So if you're imagining, just because this Instax SQ10 is a square format, if you're imagining a classic Polaroid, it is in proportions, but not in size. It's like a kind of scaled down size of it. Now, as I said, it's not the only game in town. If you want a camera with an instant printer built in, there's the other two Fujifilm formats. Polaroid don't make their own anymore, but I believe the Polaroid kind of technology was bought up by the Impossible Project, which now sells film. Film, actual print kind of cartridges for older Polaroid cameras. Doug, can you show us some vintage Polaroid cameras?
I've got a couple here. I've got only two that I'll show you. I've got a one-step Polaroid that does take Impossible Project film, and I also have a Color Pack 2, which takes a different type. This takes the 600 type film. So and I use these, by the way. I still use these. I'm sorry, I should back up. The one step takes the 600 type. This camera uses the film. Only film I get for this is I have a refrigerator that's half full of expired film, but this takes the Fuji FC100, which is basically ISO 75 color film. So you can still get brand new film for that one.
I mean, that's one of the first interesting things about the SQ10 is because it's driven by a digital sensor, the ISO sensitivity is controlled by the sensor and the amplification on it. And the white balance is also balanced digitally. It's not a fixed white balance film. So already there's some benefits of that digital system. Now, the Impossible Project offer their own camera, which is pretty high tech. Now, they've taken a completely different approach to what Fujifilm have done here, and it is a fully connected camera. It's pretty much designed to be used in conjunction with a phone wirelessly, and you can control every aspect of it, whereas the Fujifilm is designed as a standalone camera that is fully automatic. So they're two different approaches. Doug, do you have a US price for the Impossible Project camera? Because where I came from, it only gave me a UK price.
That's a good question. I don't have that handy. I should. No, I don't have it, but I'll find it before the end of the show. How's that?
Excellent. Well, it's about £280 in the UK, which we'll find out what that is from Doug in dollars soon. So it's still in a similar ballpark to the SQ10. So if you're after a high-tech solution, which is also producing bigger prints, have a look at the Impossible Project. Are there any other instant printer solutions we should be looking at?
Yeah, I think one that's important is the Polaroid Zip printer. I don't have one here, but that's a $140 printer that you can print to from your smartphone, either an Android phone or an iPhone. So $140, and it prints, again, 2x3 prints. That's the outside dimension, but it's handy, nice and small too.
Yeah, and Fujifilm also do printers, don't they? Which are designed to be used in conjunction with an existing camera or smartphone. They're using the Instax Mini format, so they're the little credit card size pictures. And I've been at some events where people have, been shooting with, in inverted commas, proper cameras with nice lenses, and then they just kind of send it with Wi-Fi straight to this printer, which they're carrying around, and output print, and there you go. So that, you've got to think, what do you want to get out of this? What do you want to get out of your photography? You like the idea of instant photography. You don't have to produce those instant prints with an instant camera. You could use a more traditional digital camera or phone and then copy those images wirelessly onto an instant printer wirelessly, which is might be more what you're looking for. Now, you can copy images from other cameras onto a memory card, put them inside the Instax SQ10 and print them out from there. I'll show you one of those in a sec. In fact, forget it. Let's do it now. I'll show you right now. Here is a print this is a picture of a cathedral in Liverpool that I took with the Leica 8 to 18 millimeter zoom. That's a micro four thirds zoom, and I had it on a Lumix GX8 body. If you're interested in that lens, and it is a fantastic ultra wide angle lens for micro four thirds owners, I've got a review of that at cameralabs.com and tons of sample images, which include this one I'm holding now. And all I did was copy that JPEG onto the micro SD memory card using my computer, inserted that card into the SQ10, and it appeared in playback just as any of the other pictures would, and I could output it. So that's quite a nice thing to do if you want. You can use it as a printer, but you will be taking the memory card out, copying something onto it, putting that memory card back in again. There's no way to do this wirelessly. So that's the first thing to get out of the way.
Yeah. By the way, that Impossible Project camera, it's called the i1, and it's $300 US. So it's not a bad deal converting pound to dollars using that camera.
Yeah,
something
definitely.
like that. Anyway, yeah, $300 anyway, and it's a very intriguing device. I've seen one.
Okay, well, before we go on, I wanted to also have a quick chat about who uses these cameras and in what circumstances would you want an instant camera. What are they for? I want to hear your thoughts first, Doug, because I know that you use them all the time. So in what sort of situations do you use them?
Yeah, I use my my Mini for one particular thing, and that's when I do photo workshops, particularly in third world countries or second world countries even. A lot of times when you're doing street photography or you're photographing people aren't too willing to be photographed. They haven't warmed up to you. They're not sure what's going on. But I will often take this camera and photograph someone, particularly a mother and child. In a third world country, it's very likely that a mother may have no photograph of her child. And so if I can take a photograph with this camera and give it to her, I have a friend for at least an hour, and she and her child will do whatever I ask them to do. The only disadvantage is that they will now have a white piece of paper in their hand that they're going like this with because they don't want to let go of it. But it works really well for workshops if I want to get some people to pose for me or for other people in the workshop. I'll take this camera along. The one thing that I miss is that with this camera, because it's analog only, if I take a photograph and I give that to the person, I will never see that image again. And so that's why, to me, this new camera is of interest, because there's at least the opportunity to save a digital version.
There's pros and cons to that ephemeral process. I was talking to someone only today about it, and they this isn't that I went to a doctor because my friend's got this problem. It really was a friend of mine. Who was saying, well, sometimes it's quite nice not to have any other version of this, a digital file hanging around that can be easily shared. You could do some fun things, shall we say, with it that, they exist only in that print. There isn't even a negative, that you can then make additional prints out of. So it really is a one-off thing. So I'll leave it to your imagination, how you may or may not want to use that. Another way you'd want to use it, I see them used a lot in offices, team building days out. You see them pinned up in people's cubicles. Weddings are very popular. I've been to some weddings where there's been one on every table. People are encouraged to take photos. Again, at the beginning of the evening, lovely portraits. Towards the end, not so nice. Again, use your imagination of how they're being used, but it's a bit of fun. Lots of people just using them for kind of like days out. I live in Brighton, which is a great destination, whether you live in the UK or you're traveling from abroad, and we get a lot of tourists here. And when I'm going around Brighton, I was taking pictures with the Instax SQ10 all day yesterday. It was a lovely sunny day, quite blustery, and you can see some of the sample images. Doug will be putting some of them throughout this review, just popping them up. If you see an image that's taken straight out of the SQ10, nothing done to it, those are the JPEGs straight from the camera. And I did actually bump into some people who were using the Instax Minis, and I was saying, why would you use it? Why aren't you using your phone? Generally younger people, and they were like, well, it's really nice to have the prints, and it's again, as Doug said, you can give them to people. They can sort of pin them up on a board, and it's memories of our trip, or something like that. There is something appealing about it, both in terms of the fact that prints have become quite unusual again. It's in the old days, prints were how you consume pictures, and then digital took over, and very few people did print. And if they did it was quite a commitment. You'd have to go into a shop or have your own printer, or you'd be at home, or you'd have to send them to a lab. It wasn't that convenient. So now there's a massive novelty in being able to output a print immediately. So you have the immediacy of digital, but the physicality of this analog print, with or without the ephemeral nature, which is does it self-destruct because it's the only version that exists, or is it like the SQ10 where you can output, if you find a picture that you really like, you can just keep printing it out as many times as you want. So that's why you may or may not want to use it. If you use it differently, or you disagree or agree with us, let us know in the comments. So if we have a look at the camera from the front, it's a very symmetrical design. You can see that it's actually got kind of a dipped area around the lens ring, which your kind of fingertips fit inside very, very nicely. And round on the back, it's got two thumb rests. Now, there's two reasons that it's got this. First is that it can actually be used completely without compromise, left or right-handed. So it's that very rare thing. It's a camera that is designed equally for left-handed people as it is for right-handed people. Or you could use it with both hands at the same time. And as I said yesterday when I was shooting with this camera, it was very blustery in Brighton yesterday. It doesn't use a viewfinder, so you're not holding it to your face for that stability. So it's actually really nice to hold this camera with both hands. You can hold this really steadily, especially if you then put your elbows against your body. I was shooting at what turned out to be quite slow shutter speed some of the time, and there was no evidence of camera shake. Although, again, at 3 megapixels, you'd have to probably be doing this to see much camera shake. You'll also notice that there's two shutter release buttons on either side of the lens, and you can configure them both to work as a shutter release, or you can configure one of them. It's up to you whether it's the left or right one of them to switch through the main shooting modes on it. Now, the main shooting modes, there's three that it goes through. There is standard, which is just take a picture. There is double exposure, which takes two pictures and comps them together. Or there's bulb, which opens the shutter for as long as you have the shutter held for up to 10 seconds. But there's no kind of cable release or remote thing, so it will be a bit shaky. So I think for the best results, rather than trying to keep it steady, just wave it up and down when there's a bright light in front of you at night and get those kind of crazy zigzag patterns. If we have a look at the side of the camera, you will see what looks temptingly to photographic enthusiasts as some kind of exposure control. There is a switch that says manual and auto. You would naturally assume that means manual exposure or auto exposure. You'd be wrong. This camera is auto only. What this switch does is control the printer. When it's set to auto, it will output a print every time you press the shutter release. In that instance, it's like using one of the analog Instax cameras. You get a picture every time you press the button. Or you can put it in manual, and then it will not print. It will save the picture either to the internal memory or to the micro SD card, and it's up to you what you do with that later on. If we have a look around, I'm not going to open the camera because I actually have film inside it at the moment. But on the side, you can see it uses a rechargeable lithium-ion pack. That's the same as some of the ones in some of Fuji's other cameras. And it's charged over USB. Now, if I open the flap on the other side, you'll see this giant flap with two tiny ports or areas of connectivity there. One of them is the USB port, which is for charging only. You cannot use it to get images on or off this camera. No amount of connecting this with USB directly to your computer will let you do that, or your phone. And you will notice what seems to me Actually, I know. I've just realised why they do this. It's got a micro SD slot, and you might think, why have they used micro SD? Because there's plenty of room for full size SD. I presume it's so that you can then put that card directly into a phone if you want to share that. If you have a phone with a micro SD slot, which I do, so that is possible. It's a bit of it's not very nice. Kind of, it doesn't go in very easily. The card, you have to be a bit kind of careful with it going in. So I'm going to tell you before. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Doug. But first of all, it has internal memory. The pictures, there's no quality options. It records pictures which are 1920 by 1920 pixels. That's about 3 megapixels. I'll tell you some more about that in a second. It can record approximately 50 of those. They work out about a megabyte each as JPEGs. You can record about 50 of those to the internal memory, but you cannot get those ones off the camera. You cannot, over USB, get them out of the camera, and you cannot copy them onto SD memory to get out there. So if you are thinking of taking pictures that you can print them as many times as you want from the camera, but if you want to get them onto a computer, you have to use a micro SD card. So that's the first gotcha. So what do you think
that's a bit odd. It is a bit odd. It has a number of options. It has a menu system apparently, but you can't move them from the internal. But that's okay, because once you go for the SD card, you just leave it in SD card mode and you're fine, right? Am I correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And when you get those pictures, now here's okay. I'll try and do this in sequence. So I'm going to turn the camera on, and you turn it on by actually turning this giant silver ring on the front. So I've done that now. And if I turn the camera around, you can see there I am in a lovely square format. Now, what you may notice, you can see the M on the side of the screen. That's because I'm in manual mode, not manual exposure mode, remember, manual printing choice. But you may be able to see that the image actually extends off the sides a little bit, almost like a rangefinder viewfinder. Can you see that at all?
The reflection's making it a little bit hard, but yes, we see a bit of it.
Yeah, you might be able to see my wonderful book in camera just appearing off the side there. That's because this isn't actually a square sensor. There's very few square sensors out there. Most cameras or devices that produce square images actually use rectangular sensors and crop them. And that's what they've done here. It's actually approximately a 4.9 megapixel sensor in the 4:3 aspect ratio. Only I would be bothered about this. And it crops all of the images to 1:1. Whether you're printing them, whether you're saving them to internal memory, whether you save them to the micro SD card and get them out. When you look at your pictures, they're always 1:1. There's no way to access that wider format, which is good because that's how you're capturing them. You're capturing them in the square format, so you don't want any nasty surprises there, do you? So, but I just wanted to point that out. So you do see a little bit of what's going on towards the left and right of the frame, but it's not captured. You'll also notice on the left-hand side of the screen a series of dots. Can you see those dots, Doug?
Yes, I do see the dots. I had my screen covered up. Yes, there they are. There's
10 dots, and they show you how many prints you've got left. So you can see that I've output 4 prints from this cartridge already. To insert a cartridge, you flip this switch at the top, and the whole back opens up, and you would put the cartridge in. It's very quick and easy. Just line up a little yellow mark and close it. A little kind of disposable header comes out. You get rid of that, and then you're fine. So that tells me that I've got 6 pictures left, but it's up to me when I print them. Now, you'll notice around the back there is a series of buttons. These are some controls on the camera. There is playback, because obviously you want to be able to play back your images to see whether they look all right. What you're hearing there just beeping is the camera's autofocus system. It's locked to the center only. There's not a lot you can do. What you will notice, though, if I'm going to take a picture of myself. Here we go. Okay, you will notice at that point when I took the picture, there is no exposure information, right? Which is why it's not a normal digital camera. Stop thinking of it as I know you're not, it was just me. Gordon, stop thinking of it as it's not a digital camera. It's an instant camera that just so happens to use a digital sensor and internal memory and a screen. So it is a digital camera. Anyway, it doesn't show that stuff on the screen, whether in playback or composition. So don't even think, oh, am I using too slow shutter speed? Forget, just be at peace with it. Now, if you take the JPEGs out of here and look at them, look at the EXIF information, you can actually find out what the camera's doing behind the scenes. The lens is a, let me just check my notes here. It is, I think, a 28.5 millimeter equivalent f2.4, and that aperture doesn't change in any of your pictures. They're all f2.4. It uses auto ISO if the shutter speed gets too slow, typically about 30th of a second. If it thinks it's going to go below that, it starts increasing the ISO. But I did find, even with that lens, that it was able to shoot at 1 to 200 ISO for almost all the time. Look at those pictures. They do look noisy. It's a tiny sensor, but you're not going to be looking at those pictures very often because you're only outputting these tiny prints with them. Now, I've taken this picture, and you'll have noticed that there's some other buttons on the back of this camera, because this camera, one of its unique benefits is not only can I save this picture, not only can I print it multiple times, but I can apply some effects to it. Now, there is a button at the top which brings up a series of effects. These are filter effects. Now, despite being a Fujifilm camera, it doesn't have like the film simulations of the X series, so you won't find Velvia or Provia or anything like that. They're much more kind of Instagrammy sounding filters like Highline or Roppongi, Marmalade. There is a sepia, Martini, obviously. What do you think, Doug? What would Martini do to me? I'm going to give me a Martini effect. What?
I would think it would give you a rather blurry look, in fact.
That's me with Martini applied. Meet me in real life and you can find out what I'm really like with Martini applied. So the other thing you can do, so you can apply these effects. I'm going to put me in sepia.
Of note, though, is that it looks like you can apply these after the exposure and before the print. Is that true?
That's true. I'm going to show you one of the other. Now, there's two other effects you can do. One is a vignette, which lets you darken the corners. Everything looks better with a vignette.
So you can combine them. You can do a sepia and vignette.
Yeah, so I'm going to add an enormous vignette to that. And the third thing you can do is change the brightness. You can make it a bit brighter or darker. And you can apply these as you're composing or after the event in playback. But there's two interesting catches. These are not actually applied permanently to the JPEG, right? They're non-destructive changes. Even at the point prior to capture, they're non-destructive. They happen afterwards in playback, but they only happen on the screen. I'm going to explain that in a bit more detail because it is very confusing. When you look at the micro SD card, each picture is joined by a CSV file. That's like an old school spreadsheet. And if you open that up in Excel, as of course you do if you're an Anoraki geek like me, you'll see that it's got a series of instructions. It says, this picture has the Martini or the sepia effect, and it has a vignette value 20, and it has a brightness value -3. And then those are automatically read and applied during playback, and they're also applied when you print. But they're not applied to the actual JPEG that's stored in the camera. So when you come back to that, it will remember what to show you on the screen. But if you look at that file on your computer, you may have shot it in monochrome with a massive vignette, but that is not what will appear on the JPEG if you get it on your computer. And in fact, if you look at this in a bit, which is a kind of a good way to work in a way, but the downside to this is that when you're applying the brightness at the point of shooting, it's not like applying exposure compensation. As far as I understand it, if I'm wrong, I'll make a correction on my written review at Camera Labs. But as I understand it, it's being applied as like a playback effect, the brightness. It's not actually changing the exposure. So you may look at an image and think, oh, it's a bit bright. I'm going to dial in what I think is negative exposure compensation by turning down the brightness. But it's not actually changing the exposure. It's capturing it using a fully automatic setting and then just turning down the brightness later. And of course, that is going to have some impact on the ultimate image quality, but you won't notice on these tiny little prints because this is not a digital camera. It's an instant camera that's designed to make prints, blah, blah, blah. But I just wanted to get that out the way. What are you thinking now, Doug? Are you thinking,
I'm thinking this is the most thorough review of an instant printer I've ever heard, and we're not done. But no, I think, we'll come back to this at the end, but this is, as you say, this is a camera for fun. It's a camera for making instant prints, and it happens to have the ability to save it digitally. I think you probably don't use this camera for the purpose of making a digital image.
No. So I'm going to print one out for you now, and I have the choice of either printing out this horrible picture that I've just taken of me, or this far more attractive picture of my mate Emily that I took earlier today, applying a black and white filter and a heavy vignette. So let's print out Emily. What you would do is either apply those effects as I was composing the picture, have the camera set to auto, and it would just come out. Or I can do it after the event, as I've done here, and press this green button here on the back of the camera. If I press that, it says, do you want to print? I'm going to click yes, and let's see what happens.
And this is Emily's premiere on the Camera Labs Photography Podcast. It's her first appearance.
It is. Now look at this.
Ooh.
So there's the print. It's come out the top. I timed this earlier at about 12 seconds. 12 seconds between you pressing OK and the picture coming out, and it's already a separate thing. So, and there is my fantastic image of Emily, which is completely white. So, with the alchemy of analog or film photography, this picture will gradually appear as I talk. Typically about 30 seconds after you press the button, it begins to appear, and it reaches kind of maximum saturation at about 2 minutes, 3 minutes later. So as we chat, I'm just going to hold it here, and you can see the developing take place. This is very nice. I'll pass this on to her tomorrow. Now, one of the things I'm going to point out straight away is that the pictures that I've output so far are coming out looking a little bit bright, a little bit overexposed. And I thought, I wonder if that's the actual images or the printer. So I had a look at the images, the actual JPEG files, and they look exposed fine. So I think the camera, the sensor, and the exposure system is working fine. But the actual printer seems to be a bit of a kind of light printer. So this may be something that is an actual mistake that they may or may not correct, or it may be something that you just have to be aware of. I mean, if you're into printing, you will almost always have to get used to what your printer is like, and you'll see, everything comes out dark on that printer, so I'll deliberately give it a bright picture, or everything comes out bright, so I'll deliberately give it a dark picture. As it stands, if nothing happens to this camera, I would deliberately apply a bit of, I'm not going to say negative exposure compensation, because it isn't. I would turn the brightness down a little bit. So that's probably as good as this picture is going to get. What do you think of that? So that was with filters applied.
Yeah, I find with the Instax mini film that, in fact, I think the issue is that it's quite contrasty. So it means that the lights are going to be bright and the dark's going to be dark, more so than you might like. But as you say, reducing the exposure a bit helps. But, here's a picture I have sitting on my desk of my wife, if you can sort of see that. And, of course, the flash was on, so it's not very fair. But the highlights are overexposed, the shadows are underexposed. It's contrasty.
That's your classic kind of Polaroid look, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, especially with the flash, it's kind of quite bold like that. Now, one of the other interesting things you can do, now it turns out that this camera pretty much outputs whatever is shown on the screen. And this has a couple of interesting possibilities. The first is that you can do a digital zoom. Now, the sensor, as we recall, is generating a file, capturing a file that is 1920 by 1920 pixels. But the printer only needs 800 by 800 pixels. And that's to print at just over 300 DPI. So that's proper photo quality. What this means is that if you do the math, I already have 1920 divided by 800 is 2.4, which means you can zoom in on a picture 2.4 times on the screen and move left and right or up and down using the cross keys on the back, and you can output a magnified view without any loss of quality. So here's that picture that I showed you earlier of Brighton seafront. This is the full image. And then what I did is I zoomed in using the digital zoom in playback and output this version. This is effectively at the maximum setting. And it does genuinely show more detail on the print, as you would expect. So that's a really nice feature. One of the other neat things you can do is, how if you zoom in on a picture, you look closer at it. If you zoom out of a picture, you begin to show thumbnail views, don't you, on a digital camera? First 4 pictures and then 9 images. And you can do that with the SQ10. But of course, these are pictures that appear on the screen, and it can print whatever's on the screen. So you can actually print a thumbnail view. So here's a thumbnail view that I printed. These are the first.
It's a contact sheet.
These are the first 9 pictures that I took with this camera yesterday in Brighton. Now, unfortunately, what it doesn't let you do is what Instagram does now, which is let you choose what those 9 pictures are. These are 9 pictures in a row. So if you have any duff ones, they're also going to appear. So actually, these are not the first 9 pictures I took. They're the first 9 good pictures, because in order to generate this composite of 9, I actually went through and deleted the ones I didn't want, making sure I'd already backed them up in case they were any good. So I kind of went for 9 for variety. So I can choose which 9 they are just by scrolling through. But they are 9 consecutive pictures, or 4 consecutive pictures if you go for that approach. So it's fun, but in order to get the 9 or 4 that you want, you may need to do a little bit of jiggling and a bit of deleting and a bit of deliberately capturing one more than you needed, and so on. But that's quite a fun thing to do. Like I say, it outputs what's on the screen, whether it's a thumbnail view, a zoomed in view, or a view with any of the 10 effects applied. There's a couple of other things I just wanted to mention about this. If you have a look at the front of the camera and you have a look at the Instax 70 that I've got here, this is a bit unfair, Doug, but there is one quite important difference between these two cameras that you can see on the front. Well, can you guess what it is?
Well, the size of the flash is one big difference. Tell me the rest.
There is no selfie mirror on the SQ10.
A selfie mirror? Is that what that is?
Selfie mirror. Yeah. So you see this little shiny bit to the side of the lens.
I didn't know that was a selfie mirror on the new one, though.
Yeah. So that's a little mirror which lets you see yourself, and obviously there's massive parallax.
Wait a minute, you're talking about the Mini has the mirror.
The Mini has the mirror. The SQ10 does not.
Let's see. Does my Mini have a mirror? My Mini does not.
That's because you've got the series one.
My Mini 90 does not have such a mirror.
So the Mini 70 does. So this might be if you're going to be taking pictures of yourself, or you and a friend, you go, I'm random. Yeah, we're on Brighton Pier. Here we are. You can kind of see what you're going to get with these little mirrors. With the SQ10, you can't. Of course, the benefit of the SQ10 in a sort of selfie environment is that it's a digital camera. It's not a digital camera. It is a digital camera. So you can take as many pictures as you want. And if your head's chopped off of them, it doesn't matter. You just do them again. But there is no way of seeing what you're kind of capturing as you capture it, whereas you can on the Instax 70. But of course, the disadvantage of the Instax 70 is that a print is going to come out every time you press that button. And you've only got 10 in a roll. So you've got to, you've got to be really committed to that picture. It's also worth pointing out, obviously it's a fully analog system. You're composing with a little kind of basic optical viewfinder on those analog ones, whereas it is a screen only on the SQ10. There is no optical viewfinder of any description on this camera. And I think, Doug, if I look at my nose, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to tell you about it. So what is your? The kind of first question. One of the first questions that sprung to mind when I saw this camera is goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. It's very expensive for an instant camera. Apart from the Impossible Project one, obviously, it's $250, $300. Whereas you can get an Instax Mini for as little as $50. So, is it 5 times better? Yeah, the prints are bigger, but it's digital. There are pros and cons, but if, in fact, you're not that bothered about the digital bit, but you are bothered about the square bit, I wonder if they're going to do an analog version of this that takes the square cartridge but isn't a digital system. I asked Fujifilm that. They didn't get back to me with an answer by the time we filmed this video, but if I get an answer, I'll put that in my written review at cameralabs.com. Would anyone like to see a fully analog version that makes the square pictures? I think I would. What do you think?
Yeah, I happen to like the square format. I think square is perfect for portraits. Many of the portraits that I shoot end up as square images regardless. So, Fuji's going to react to the marketplace. If the camera does well, they've already invested in the square format cartridges. So the only question is, do they recoup their investment by coming out with additional models? We'll have to see. Hard to say whether this nearly $300 camera sells well or not. The big thing that's interesting is this whole idea of instant prints. You mentioned weddings, for example. One of the things that I see at a number of weddings is people renting a photo booth, an old style photo booth, where people can go in and get a strip of 4 pictures. That's very popular. But again, if 2 people each want to go in there together and each want to take away some prints, they either have to cut them in half or do 8 exposures. So, instant prints, it's all for fun. This is pure for fun. I don't know. There are probably some people who are doing some very creative things with it. There are probably people who are taking these prints and scanning them and doing all sorts of bizarre things with them. But to me, it's mostly about fun. I mentioned the particular practical application of leading a workshop and taking an instant camera for the purpose of introducing yourself to strangers. It works quite well. But I want to mention again, let's just review a couple of things. You've got the mini cameras that are pure analog. You've got this new camera that we're talking about here, the SQ10, which is an analog with some digital features, let's say. Then you've got the two standalone printers. You have the Instax Share printer from Fuji, $160, uses the mini film. And that's a camera a printer that is marvelous if you're a Fuji user, because you can go from your Fuji camera directly to the Instax printer. If you don't, you can go from any camera to a smartphone to the printer. It's painful, but it can be done. There's also the Polaroid printer, the Zip printer, $140. We mentioned that. And then if you look at the cameras, I'm just reviewing again. The Impossible Project, $300 for their own camera. They're now making film for the 600 series, the SX70 series, the Spectra series. So you can buy Polaroid film for your old Polaroid cameras. And I want to mention one that we haven't thought of, which I'm particularly intrigued with. It's called the Jolly Look camera. The Jolly Look camera is a Kickstarter project. And you can actually, for a pledge of $29 to the Kickstarter project, you can line yourself up to get one of these. This is a cardboard camera that has a plastic lens, or you can use the pinhole lens. It uses Instax mini film. And what they've done is they've developed a little crank mechanism that will take the film and process it by squeezing the film together, the film and releasing the chemicals inside. So look for the Jolly Look Kickstarter project. So again, it's all for fun. Should you spend $50 or $60, or should you spend $280 because you want something that's pseudo-digital? Tough call, huh?
Yeah, and the other thing you have to think about is how you're capturing them and what you want to do with them. I mean, when I first got hold of the SQ10, I was frustrated that it didn't have Wi-Fi. I was frustrated that I couldn't get the pictures, say, onto my phone for showing on Instagram. But then I thought, why would I want to do that anyway? It's a fixed 28mm equivalent lens, which is pretty much what I've got on my phone. It's producing low resolution pictures than I've got on my phone. Why would I want to do that? You know, if my goal is to post a picture on Instagram, then I'm going to take it with my phone camera. I'm going to take it with a so-called proper camera and transfer it to my phone and use the phone for the sharing. So I kind of quickly came to peace with that. But equally, there's this whole idea of the moment is only happening once, and what are you going to capture it with? If I do capture it with my phone, then I've got this device that's fully connected. I've got a high resolution file that I can do things with, and I can print it if I want, and I can print it instantly and portably if I have, say, one of those Fujifilm Instax portable printers. So to me, that still gives you more flexibility. I mean, it's not as cute and not as much fun as carrying around one of these or one of these. I'm holding up the Instax cameras. But they are kind of limited in what you can do. That limitation is part of the fun, though, especially going back to the fully analog ones, that, you know, it's a very kind of fresh approach to photography, especially if you, say, weren't around during the film days the first time round. You know, it's really nice to think, I've only got 10 pictures and I'm going to make sure that each picture counts, and I've only got a fixed lens, so I'm going to make sure I move around the subject, you know, until I get the composition that I want. And then I'm going to produce a print, whether you've, you know, got the analog or the digital version, going to produce a print that's quite a unique thing. You know, still people don't produce many prints. It's a nice thing to have, especially if you've got a project or like a day out, whether it's a wedding, the day out, or your holiday, or something like that. There's something really nice aesthetically about having a bunch of these little prints that you stick on a pinboard on your, you know, on your kitchen wall, or even at work or wherever it is. And they're often nicer and kind of more inspirational, more immediate and spontaneous than other styles of photography. So I do really like it. I definitely like shooting with these cameras. The question, though, is which one?
There's one other aspect, though, and it has to do with sharing. And this is something that you'll only get when you spend some time with these cameras. You know, it's very common, at least in street photography, to go out and photograph a stranger or to photograph yourself with a stranger and say, hey, give me your email address, give me your Instagram account, give me your Facebook account, and I'll send you a copy, or here's how to find it. And in street photography, you know, I hand out business cards, I get or tell people to contact me. 1 out of 10 people will follow up. But if I can give them a print, I solve the problem. It's the original way to share photos, which is to just give them the photo. And I find that very satisfying. People get to come away with sort of the instant gratification. You don't even have to wait for it to show up on Instagram. It's there in your hand. So there's a cultural or personal aesthetic to this in terms of sharing things with strangers in particular immediately that you just can't get any other way.
And of course, the benefit of the SQ10 is that Doug's original problem, which was that he can give the print away, but then he's given away that image forever. This is stored the picture, and you can print it out as many times as you like. So it's nice. It's nice to have that.
Very good. All right, Gordon, I think we've done it, huh?
Yeah, definitely. If you enjoyed this and you find our work useful, you can buy Doug and I a coffee, which there is a link directly below this video on YouTube, or you can use many of the links that I spread all over cameralabs.com. We really appreciate your support. It really helps us keep going. And if you did like us reviewing this kind of camera, because it's the first time we've done this, then let us know if you want to see reviews of more of this sort of thing, or whether it's just back to the old $2,000, $4,000 workhorses. You tell us. We are here to serve.
Absolutely. And if you like anything that we review here on Camera Labs, please go to cameralabs.com, click on the buy links now, the affiliate links that buys us even more coffee and helps us pay for some of the things we have to do. And also see that little book over the corner, over Gordon's shoulder, In Camera. This is a marvelous book. Those of you who have listened to the podcast know about it, but I'll mention it one more time. It's terrific photographs that are done JPEG only, fully in camera with no post-processing, and complete explanations of how they were made. Gordon, aside from being an amazing reviewer, is a terrific photographer as well. And if you're interested in any photo workshops, street photography workshops, go to dougk.com and look up my workshops there. Gordon, thanks again.
Doug, do you know, someone asked me the other day in person, they said, tell me the truth. But what's Doug really like in person? Is he really as nice as he comes across in the video? I said, no, he's really horrible, actually. It's unbelievable. I said, no, he's actually nicer in real life. He's such a sweet, lovely guy. So if you get a chance to shoot with Doug, do so. Do so at the soonest opportunity. And with that, we bid you farewell. Thanks for watching and listening.
Thanks again. We'll see you on the next episode of the Camera Labs Photography Podcast. Bye-bye.